Okay, we are now recording session number 4 of an introduction to worldviews, worldviews and apologetics. We're working our way through the 7 broad features of possible worldviews that are out there that form the basis of religion and irreligion. Everybody has a worldview. I'm Dr. John McMath, retired Old Testament professor of Moody Bible Institute. I'm joined by my friends in Italy and in the Philippines, and we've been doing this all during the plague years, and we're still together. The plague doesn't seem to have given up on all of us yet. There's probably still some of us are still going to get the bubonic plague or whatever COVID is being booked as this year. But I hope we all get better quick. Okay, we're going to get started because there's kind of a lot. I'm going to get right into pantheism. Let me see if I can make this work. Ooh, okay, there it goes. Okay, I'm going to start off with pantheism with a picture of Obi-Wan Kenobi from Star Wars. Now, I'm one of those purists. I have not been following Star Wars since the first 3 movies were made back in the 70s. I loved the first Star Wars movie, which turns out is number 4 in the sequence, but it was the first one that came out, where we're introduced to Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi. It's a fascinating journey, but the underlying philosophy of Star Wars is pantheism. Pantheism is the idea that the world is God, and God is the world. This is not quite the same as atheism. The atheist would say there's nothing out there but the world. The pantheist understands that there is a supernatural component to all of this, but they argue that everything that exists, including the material universe and the spiritual reality that the rest of us might call God, is one thing. Sometimes pantheism is called monism, from the Latin mono, one, or single. Pantheism reduces all of existence to a single thing. Star Wars is just one manifestation of pantheism. It's actually a very ancient set of ideas. And when Obi-Wan says, the Force is an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together. He's giving a kind of a popular view of pantheism. Star Wars theology is actually really superficial. And it's worth looking a little deeper, but I'm going to come back to the Star Wars imagery because I happen to like that stuff. But let's look at what pantheism began as. Really, pantheism is an ancient philosophy. This is a passage from the Upanishads, the Hindu scriptures. Pantheism began in India. The Upanishads are written in Sanskrit, which is one of the most ancient languages on the earth. It is the original Indo-European language. So people who study, for example, in my field, I ended up studying a lot of Greek. The serious scholars of Greek also study Sanskrit, because Sanskrit in India that began to be written down around 3000 BC is one of it's the most ancient of the Indo-European languages, and Greek comes from Sanskrit. Latin also can be traced back to Sanskrit. English can be traced to Sanskrit. Chinese can be traced to Sanskrit. For that matter, Tagalog can be traced to Sanskrit. It's a very, very ancient language, and this was written down probably before the Bible was written. So it's quite ancient stuff. So somewhere here, this is the mundaka. The term mundaka refers to the climax, the most important part of the Upanishads. And here, the definition of pantheism. Thus, Brahman is all in all. Okay, Brahman is it would be wrong to say that Brahman is the term that pantheists use for God, because they make no distinction between God and the material universe. So Brahman is all in all, everything that is. And unlike the atheist, not just the material universe, not just that cup and that rock and that tree, but also a spiritual force that pervades all existence. He is action, knowledge, goodness supreme. To know him hidden in the lotus of the heart, this is the lotus blossom in the background here, is to untie the knot of ignorance. Self-luminous is Brahman, ever present in the hearts of all. He is the refuge of all. He is the supreme goal. In him exists all that moves and breathes. In him exists all that is. He is both that which is gross and that which is subtle. Adorable is he. Beyond the ken of the senses is he. Attain thou him. And I, as Yoda would like to say, teach this one I cannot. This is, anyway, that's the Mundaka passage in the Upanishads. Star Wars pop theology represents kind of a Western take on this very ancient Eastern mysticism. The bottom line is that nothing exists apart from, quote, God, unquote, Brahman. And all things are in some way identified with God. So that I've got a cup over here. Here, see if I can get my cup up. Oh, and it makes my head disappear. Isn't that good? Okay, my cup is God. This computer is God. Sometimes I worry about that. The book over there is God. Everything is God. And everything that is immaterial is God. It's all God. Pantheism views God as the world and the world as God. Nothing exists that is not God. So you and I are God. So it's a little hard to get our heads around, but let's take a look at another one. Pantheism has a long history. Eastern mysticism begins with the Sanskrit sages, way back in the roots of Hinduism, along the Indus River Valley around 3000 BC. At about the same time that the polytheism was developing in the Tigris and Euphrates Valley and in the Nile Valley after the flood and after the Tower of Babel. People went three directions. Pantheism is essentially different from both the Mesopotamian forms of religion and the Egyptian forms of religion. In the midst of it all, we're looking way back in the strands of history, there were believers in the one true God. But following Noah, when his sons went off, those people in the majority chose worldviews that were far different from the biblical worldview. So Eastern mysticism goes way, way back. In India, we call this Hinduism. And Hinduism is really the pure pantheism. Buddhism had its roots in Indian Hinduism, but travels into the Southeast Asia realm and into China. So Buddhism today is the major offshoot, some would say the major heresy of Hinduism. There are lots and lots of variations on the theme. Hinduism and Buddhism share a lot of the same worldview bases. They're both pantheistic. Buddhism involves the veneration of enlightened teachers, gurus or Buddhas. There was the one Buddha, Gautama the Buddha. Gautama is the name of the Indian mystic who first claimed to have achieved nirvana or enlightenment through meditation. This was something that hadn't been attempted before, or if it had, nobody wrote it down. But Gautama Buddha did this. That happens about 700 AD. So Buddhism is a much more recent thing. Hinduism goes way back. In the West, very interesting. There are some Greek philosophers, the pre-Socratic philosophers were often pantheistic. Parmenides is the most famous example, and I'm not going to give you examples of the writings of Parmenides. Benedict of Spinoza is a medieval teacher who came up with essentially a Western, more or less Platonic version of pantheism. G.W.F. Hegel is one of the Enlightenment philosophers who came up with a rationalistic form of pantheism. And we're actually not going to look at any of those guys. They're interesting, but there's too many, and we can't look at all of them. We'll look at some. I'll show how this has turned up in the West. In recent years, by that I mean the last 100 years, pantheism has found a home in the university scene in Europe and America, and in the urban areas of the world where there are Western thinkers. So you're going to find pantheists in Manila, in Shanghai, in all over Europe, in Bogota, in Brasilia, the big cities with an intellectual class go into the pantheist direction. There are some reasons for that. Pantheism, as we're going to see, makes no demands at all. It's a non-religious religion. It's kind of a philosophy of going with the flow. You know, in the university scene, you'll see practices like yoga. And people who think that yoga is just a stretching exercise really haven't studied it. Zen is a kind of a Chinese philosophical approach to life, a kind of a stoic approach to life. And Zen is very common in the West. Transcendental meditation, which involves either Zen or yoga or a combination of them, People who do yoga as a exercise are often instructed by their teachers in a lot of the methods of transcendental meditation that are essentially pantheism. We'll talk about and some of the other stuff that we see. So let's go all the way back. We'll turn on the Wayback Machine, go all the way back into ancient Sanskrit. This image on the left, that's Sanskrit, and it's an alphabetic script. That's not just chicken scratches. That's a real alphabet with real words, and it's actually pretty neat. It reads from left to right, and has all of the elements of grammar that we're later on going to find in Greek. So it's a pretty neat language. But the earliest use of Sanskrit was to produce the Hindu scriptures, and I've used the time frame 3000 BC. The fact is, we don't know exactly when the Hindu scriptures were written or by whom. We just don't know. These writings are known as Vedas, and they culminate in a final group of books that are called the Upanishads, and are also called Vedanta. Vedanta is the name that we give to the final form of Hindu pantheism. So in the Upanishads, along with another Sanskrit tale called the Bhagavad Gita, is found the basis of Vedanta pantheism. So it goes way, way back, and the Bhagavad Gita has gotten very popular in the West. A lot of hippies back in the 70s would try to read the Bhagavad Gita as though it made sense, and what do we know? So as we're studying a little bit of Vedanta, let's look at the categories that we've looked at with worldviews, because they all have some things in common. Okay, what about God? I'm back to Star Wars. There's Luke Skywalker on the left and Yoda on the right. Yoda is the great guru of the Force. So we've got a lot of pantheism going on there. So Vedanta, this ultimate teaching of Hinduism, teaches that God is one. He is infinite. He is impersonal. The impersonality of God is an important feature of Vedanta. He is absolute and indivisible one. What Western thinkers would call atomic one. You can't divide God into the notion of three persons in one God would be a heretical, crazy idea, or the idea that you and I are not God would be a horrible, terrible misunderstanding of reality, according to Vedanta. So God, or Brahman, is beyond thought and speech. You can't actually think about God. Okay, here's a quote from Vedanta. He truly knows Brahman who knows him as beyond knowledge. Who thinks that he knows not. The ignorant think that Brahman is known, but the wise know him to be beyond knowledge. Okay. Thus, Brahman is inexpressible and undefinable. Nothing can truly be said or thought of Brahman. Okay, that's an important feature. That's not a bug, that's a feature. Sir, said the pupil to his master, teach me the nature of Brahman. The master did not reply. When a second and a third time he was importuned, he answered, I teach you indeed, but you do not follow. His name is silence. And I can visualize Yoda in the cave trying to explain this to young Luke Skywalker, a young Jedi. Okay, well, what do we do with the world then? Here we are, surrounded by stuff. I mean, I've got a computer in front of me. I'm living in a house. It just rained this morning. I'm getting ready to go outside and work on a Subaru engine that we're trying to rebuild. That's a whole, I'm surrounded by a whole lot of stuff, and there appears to be a whole world out there. Vedanta pantheism teaches that all is God. God is all. There's only the one reality. So the world that we see and hear and touch and taste doesn't exist. It is an illusion, or Maya, the Hindu word Maya. Like walking in a dark woods at night and thinking we see a snake, or returning in the light, we see only a rope. It was an illusion and doesn't really exist. Okay. Now, the problem with the logic there is that we made a mistake. It's not a snake, but it really is a rope. So how do you say it doesn't exist? Of course it exists. We just misidentified it. Anyway, meditate, says the Vedanta, and you will realize that mind, matter, and Maya, the power that unites mind and matter, are but three aspects of Brahman, the one reality. So somehow Brahman can have three aspects or modes: mind, matter, and Maya, which is illusion. Okay, so we're trying to get our head around that, and it doesn't really work all that well. So what do we do with man? If the universe doesn't exist, if Brahman is the only reality, then who or what is man? Vedanta pantheism says that man is Brahman. Maya, the illusory universe, has deceived man into thinking he is particular in the universe. In other words, that I am something different from the rest of the universe. Here I am sitting in this chair, and I am me, and the rest of you are not me. But that's an illusion. Enlightenment, a very important word in pantheism, involves realizing that the self, the Atman, the Sanskrit word Atman, is the human self. And enlightenment involves realizing that the self is Brahman. And here's the picture in the background is the Hindu guru coming to the point of enlightenment and realizing that he is in fact the world. Having attained to Brahman, a sage declared, I am life. I am established in the purity of Brahman. I have attained the freedom of the self. I am Brahman, self-luminous, the brightest treasure. I am endowed with wisdom. I am immortal, imperishable. Now, most of the rest of us would call that pride, but the enlightened sage has attained this knowledge that he himself is God. Okay, when we understand what pantheism is really all about, we find that we're actually standing on fairly dangerous ground. Let's look a little farther. This image is actually Friedrich Nietzsche, with his pistol. There is an old illusion. It is called good and evil. Okay, and Nietzsche would say that. If there is no God, all things are permitted. Pantheism and atheism have this in common. They both believe that ethically there are no standards, there are no absolutes at all. So in ethics, the science of what is good and what is evil, man must transcend the world of illusion, going beyond the concepts of good and evil. Okay, Brahman includes both good and evil, and any distinction between them is an illusion. To go beyond good and evil means a person is no longer troubled by what he may or may not have done. Indeed, even the results of such actions are viewed with indifference. Okay, so here's Nietzsche getting ready to assassinate someone. Whether he shoots or not, whether he is a drunk or the ruler of a nation, is of no significance. Doesn't matter one way or the other, because all things are permitted. Nothing is good, nothing is evil. Everything just is. And ultimately, that's a pantheistic notion. We continue ethics just a little further. This is from the Bhagavad Gita. This idea of indifference to past, present, or future actions is really well illustrated in the Bhagavad Gita. This very, very old Sanskrit book, it's actually more of a booklet, but we call it the book, describes a conversation between a warrior and a chariot driver. Okay, and the warrior turns out to be Krishna, one of the incarnations of Brahman, and Arjuna, his disciple. So the disciple is the chariot driver, and Arjuna is concerned that in the war he may have to kill men who are his friends. Krishna, in this scene, explains that he must detach himself from the fruits of his actions. He must detach himself from what he does. And Krishna says this in the Bhagavad Gita: he whose mind dwells beyond attachment, untainted by ego, no act shall bind him with any bond. Though he slay these thousands, he is no slayer. Well, how can you say that? The fact is there's no difference between doing an evil thing and doing some other thing. There's no difference. It's all one. So if I go off and become a monk, or if I go off and become a mass murderer, it's all one in pantheism. Now, the fact is, it's not. It's not. The pantheists will argue that the monk needs to continue to do good things. Well, if there's no difference between good and evil, how can you ever know? At any rate, Krishna goes on to explain that the path of union with Brahman is yoga. Yoga is the Sanskrit term that means union. So when you practice yoga, what you're attempting to arrive at is a union with the one, the Brahman, through meditation and mind control, hard work, love and devotion. Okay, think about all of that. It doesn't matter what you do, and yet here are some things you've got to do: meditation, mind control, hard work, love and devotion. You can attain to unattachment and indifference. Once you've worked really hard on this, you can recognize that all of that hard work is useless. Then the master can transcend good and evil. Okay, if you're feeling a little confused at this point, that means you're normal. Pantheism is essentially irrational. I'll be doing some evaluation in just a little bit. Let's go on to karma. This is another classic Hindu word. Karma is the original recycling program. You've all seen this triangular recycling thing, and it isn't really true. Stuff that is recycled rarely comes back better. It always comes back a little bit worse and a little bit nastier. But in pantheism, the whole point is to realize oneness with Brahman. This is essential in the Vedanta, in the original kind of Hinduism. Without this realization, one is destined to a cycle of samsara. Samsara is the wheel of time, and desire, birth, death, and rebirth, reincarnation. So the idea of the cyclical view of history, what goes around comes around, history repeats itself over and over again, is called samsara. Karma is the law of action and reaction. It's the moral law of cause and effect. Now, if there is no good and evil, what is the moral law of cause and effect? Every decision that we make affects every other and determines the whole rest of life for endless cycles. It just keeps going on and on and on and on. The escaping of samsara by means of good works is the only way out. Okay, good deeds. This is the only concept of salvation that is found in Vedanta pantheism. And yet, if there is no difference between good and evil, how can you ever tell? Well, never mind. Let's go on to one of the modern popularizers of pantheism. This is Dr. D.T. Suzuki. Is obviously a Japanese thinker, very popular in the West. He taught at Columbia University in America, several other American universities. He's an expert on modern Buddhism. And the Buddhism that he introduced to the West, we call Zen Buddhism. And Zen is fascinating. It's still pantheism. It's still all of what was. It includes a reverence for the great teacher Buddha, but it's more than that, and it's a simplification of a lot of the Eastern versions of Buddhism. So Zen is not really a system of thought or a philosophy founded on logic or analysis. That's one of the most important things to understand about Zen. It doesn't involve any thinking. Matter of fact, if you start thinking about it, you'll miss the whole thing. If you start trying to put together philosophical chains of cause and effect, you will simply miss the whole thing. Zen is opposed to dualism. Dualism means that there is some kind of a subject or object distinction in the world. And this is pantheism in a nutshell. Everything is one. There is no I-thou relationship. There is no subject-object relationship. There is only the one. We must transcend the intellect, sever yourself from understanding and penetrate the Buddha mind, whatever that means. Okay, let's go on to another. There's a book that was famous back in the 70s. I read this a long time ago. It's kind of fun. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Zen is fascinating because it is so flexible. Anybody who wants to call himself a Zen master can be a Zen master. Let's look at some of the specifics here. Zen has nothing to teach us in the way of intellectual analysis, nor has it any set doctrines which are imposed on its followers for acceptance. So there's nothing to learn. Zen has no sacred books, not a one. I mean, this little book is probably the closest you'll ever get. There are no dogmatic tenets. Indeed, Zen teaches nothing. In it, we teach ourselves. Zen merely points the way. Zen is not religion. It has no God to worship, no ceremony to observe, no future abode to which the dead are destined. Zen does not deny God's existence. That should be God, not good. God's existence. God is neither denied nor insisted on. In other words, who cares? Zen is simply life, unencumbered by abstractions or concepts of life and death. Go with the flow. Water seeks its own level. Just kind of do life and don't worry about it. And particularly don't argue about anything. Years ago, when my wife and I, this really dates us. We're talking roughly 55 years ago, before we were married. My wife and I, while we were in college, were dating, and her dad, a wonderful guy, during World War II, had been a radio man on for the Navy in the Pacific, and had fought against the Japanese. And after he came back home, he spent the rest of his life, besides earning a living and making a home for his family, he spent as much energy as he could on rebuilding the relationship between Japanese people and Americans. So he and his wife, Grandma, took multiple trips to Japan, and they arranged for Japanese people to come to America. And many, many times I remember the Japanese visitors coming to America, and Donna and I were often the hosts for these visits. This is back in the, oh my goodness, we were married in 71, so it was the late 60s. And in those days, the hippies and a group that we called the Jesus people were around. Now, Donna and I were going to a Bible church here in Spokane at the time, but we took I remember one particular Japanese girl, about college age, nice girl. I can't remember her name, but very, very nice girl. Donna and I were showing her around in downtown Spokane, and we ran across a group of Jesus people, and one of the young men with long hair, kind of odd looking character, walked up to her in the street and said, "Good afternoon, young lady. Jesus loves you." And she looked back at him and bowed in the Japanese way and said, "Why, thank you very much, and Buddha loves you too." And that was perfectly okay for her. Within Buddhism, there is no right and wrong. There's no argument to be made. You go with the flow of whatever you happen to be doing, and everything is stable. That's a bit of Zen. Okay, God and the world. Okay, if God is man and man is God, all right, God and I are one in the act of my perceiving him. In fact, everything is God. All is one. There is no other out there. So the one mind is one nature, all-embracing mind. And the mind is Buddha. Now, Buddha is the way, and the way is Zen. Zen Buddhists find the notion of a personal God who created out of nothing, allowed sin, and sent his son to die for sin terribly offensive. They really don't like that idea, because everything is supposed to be one. And yet at the same time, if you're doing Buddhism in the Zen style, you're not supposed to be offended. And yet this is terribly offensive. Okay, let's talk about man, because somewhere along the way, we're going to start getting completely crazy. Zen maintains that individual human beings are nothing but a self-manifestation of dharmakava, which is another word for God or godness. This is not supposed to be understood as a denial of material existence, even though that's exactly what they've just done. It's not supposed to be a denial of the material existence of man, only the denial of his individuality. Okay? Man exists as an inseparable part of the whole, which is God. So like a gallon of water in the ocean can't be distinguished from the rest of the ocean. Okay, so what do we do with ethics? Okay, ethics in Buddhism may be thought of as a reconstruction of character, according to Suzuki. Suzuki teaches that ethics involves transcending ignorance by destroying self-orientation and learning to serve others. Okay. Which produces some interesting results. A Zen monk, this is a Buddhist monk on the right, progresses toward enlightenment by doing manual labor and by begging. And both of those are very characteristic. I've seen this in Buddhist parts of the world, particularly Thailand. And in Vietnam, I've never been there. The Buddhists there are very devoted people. They do manual labor, they work hard, and they beg for a living. They own nothing, and often don't even have a temple where they get together. In some places they do. A Zen monk progresses by not committing evils, but to do what is good. But wait, you say, there's no difference between good and evil. It's all an illusion. Yes, but you shouldn't do evil, and you should definitely do that which is good. But you say, and to keep one's thoughts pure. Well, wait a minute. If there's no difference between pureness and okay, I'm already having trouble with this. That is the teaching of all the Buddhas. All right. So ethics is kind of a difficult thing. A Zen monk is supposed to be doing something good, but in fact, he can't quite manage it. So what is history then? Since nothing really exists, okay, and the world itself is an illusion, it follows that history is a meaningless concept. There is no past, there is no future, there is only the present flow of existence of the one. Okay, and I'm a part of the one, and so I'm a part of the flow. And my purpose in life is simply to go with the flow. This present flow of existence. History can be thought of as a manifestation of the ignorance, the belief that things exist separately from the one. And history simply has no place at all in Zen. That's just, there is no history. Nothing has happened before this moment. Nothing will ever happen after this moment. There is only the eternal right now. So what is man's destiny? Well, say the very concept of a destiny is that something happens after, but there is no after. Okay. The destiny of man, according to Zen, is to achieve nirvana, which is the annihilation of the notion of self-substance, the idea that I exist, the error that arises from that false notion. The path to nirvana necessarily involves, listen to this, the destruction of all logical thought. Okay? This is common in pantheism. The destruction of logical thought is very important. thinking in straight lines from cause to effect, from premises to rational conclusions, from evidence to a verdict. All of that kind of thinking is absurd in Zen. One of the great characteristics of Zen is the quoting of illogical and absurd sayings. Listen to the sound of one hand clapping. Okay, what is the color of the wind? In order to achieve nirvana, one must free himself from logic, words, concepts, abstractions, anything that keeps him from experiencing what is neither being nor non-being. And when this occurs, nirvana has been achieved. And if all of this seems absurd, you are quite normal. Here in the West, the people I've known who are serious pantheists or into some kind of Zen or New Age pantheism are also drug addicts. Because it really helps to be stoned to understand this sort of thing. We'll give you one last example. This is Shirley MacLaine, and I don't expect you to know who Shirley MacLaine is. She's I don't even know when she died, but back in the 70s, she was famous as an American movie star. I don't know what she was in. I really don't. She was some kind of movie star. And it looks like she's a pretty lady, but she's become a kind of a pop theologian for the New Age pantheism up until she died sometime early 2000s. And she's written books and led seminars and has become a guru to the higher self movement. So she's a good representative of the kind of popular pantheism that we find primarily in America and in Europe. So she deserves a couple of paragraphs in spite of the fact that I don't particularly like her. Okay, so for Shirley MacLaine, let's talk about God. God is the impersonal divine force that is the organizer of all the matter of the cosmos. God is a subatomic force, the intelligent energy that organizes life. It is everywhere, in all of us, and gives the Jedi his strength, I presume. Here's Yoda talking about the Force. God, or the God force, of which all things are a part, MacLaine says, is the divine energy that created the universe and holds it together harmoniously. Okay, wait a minute. I didn't think there was a distinction between the God force and the universe. The universe doesn't exist. Never mind, Shirley MacLaine says that the God force created the universe. We are all little drops in the infinite pond of God. Okay, well, that's pretty but irrational. Okay, creation. MacLaine speaks of creation, but she refers not to a creation out of nothing. Theism argues for a creation ex nihilo, out of nothing. Instead, she seems to speak of a creation out of God, ex theo. Since God is good, according to Shirley MacLaine, even though we can't define the difference between good and evil, God is good. So is all the world. Mankind, life, is basically good. In other words, there are no bad things. That takes care of ethics for us. So we're going to get beyond this. The universe is not the space-time material stuff that is studied by the physicists. Oh, okay. Because there is no time or space. There is only experience, the eternal now of the Zen. Okay. If you're not confused yet, it gets worse. So why do we keep feeling like stuff is not so good? Well, evil doesn't exist. It has no extra mental reality. This is Obi-Wan. He's trying to explain the disturbance in the force that he's feeling. Evil is a disharmony that arises out of ignorance. Well, if ignorance is a bad thing, doesn't that mean that, well, never mind. Since the world is God and God is good, it follows that there is no evil, only the illusion of evil caused by ignorance. Okay. So let's just say that Shirley MacLaine is not an intellectual heavyweight. Nevertheless, this has gotten a lot of press, has gotten a lot of coverage in the West. Okay, what about man? Well, here we are, and here's your Zen master, New Age meditator, getting ready to become one with the whatever. We are all spiritual beings. We just don't acknowledge it. We are spiritual beings of energy that happen to be in a physical body at the present time. We are those who only temporarily reside in bodies. We can begin to realize that we are actually God by chanting the Hindi incantation Om, A-U-M, is a transliteration of the Sanskrit. And we would translate that, I am. You know, somebody else who said, I am. That is the fundamental name for God in the Old Testament. I am that I am, Yahweh. Jesus said before Abraham was, I am. So when the Hindu mystic or the Zen Buddhist meditator chants Om, he's claiming eternal existence, godness for himself. You chant that over and over until we achieve enlightenment. Sounds good. Okay, let's talk about ethics. Well, according to Shirley MacLaine, this is what ethics is about. There are no absolute gods. We are not under the law of God. We are God. So it's not about being good. It's about recognizing that you are God. And whatever it is that you're doing is neither good nor evil, is completely indifferent. So an Adolf Hitler and a Mother Teresa are indifferent. It doesn't matter if you murder 20 million or save 20 million from poverty. It's all the same. There are no laws. So what happens to man? After death, reincarnation. All our previous lives have molded us, and this is the law of karma. So karma is what goes around comes around. You just get born into another life to try it one more time. And escaping from your karma requires shifting gears along the way or doing something good, even though there is no definable good. All right, some basic beliefs. Let's put this together, kind of evaluate what we're looking at. First of all, God is impersonal and one. So there's just one, and everything is one. And this one is utterly impersonal and unknowable. Secondly, the world flows out of God. Even though the world is God, it flows from God. So it's a creation out of God. God then is the world. Okay, already I'm confused, but that's an important point. Miracles are impossible. Miracles can't happen because whatever happens is by definition what happens, and whatever happens is God. Man needs to unite with God, but there is no disunity. And again, I'm confused. Ethics are never absolute, which is a very popular thing in the world. You're going to find that atheists and polytheists and panentheists and deists, most non-Christians would argue that ethics are not absolute. It changes depending on society. It changes depending on what we think at any given time. What seems good to me may not be good for you, and so on. Relative ethics, situational ethics are a big attraction of pantheism. And then finally, history is either an illusion or a cycle. Depends on the pantheist that you're listening to. Some argue for a cyclical kind of history, where things happen over and over and over again until you finally work it out. And others would say that history is completely an illusion. Nothing has ever happened and nothing ever will happen. There's only the present instant that is truly a thing. Nothing else has ever been. Okay, and if that's not confusing enough, wait, we're not through yet. Contributions. Has pantheism got anything good to teach us? Frankly, not very much. Pantheists are not completely wrong in everything that they say, though. They do some parts of their philosophy reasonably well, even though they don't call it a philosophy. They do some things well. Pantheists attempt to explain all of reality, not just the parts. And that really is an important thing. Atheists really can't explain a lot of reality. And there are other worldviews that also fail in this. The pantheists are trying to explain everything, which is important. If you're going to have a worldview, you've got to have the whole world in view. So 2 thumbs up, the pantheists have got this one nailed. It's about all they've got, but they've got it. 2, the pantheists recognize that God must be related to the world and not utterly distant. And in this, they're better than some of the other worldviews that we'll be looking at over the next couple of weeks. So that's, again, a thumb up. Thirdly, pantheism teaches that God is absolutely necessary. This is true. They've got that right. They've got a lot of things wrong, but this is definitely true. And then fourth, pantheism stresses that we should not limit God with our limited language. This also is true. To a very real extent, it is not possible to fully define God with our human language, and we have to recognize that. At some level, we speak about God by analogy. God is like a lion, or God is like our father, or God is like a craftsman, but he is none of those. God is infinitely beyond what we can conceive. And so the pantheist has got that right. However, we do have some criticisms. First of all, pantheism is philosophically self-defeating. The pantheist has to say, I am God. Okay, but if this is true, why is change possible? Matter of fact, why is change necessary at all? Why are we not all conscious of our godness? If our individual existence is an illusion, why is the pantheistic notion not also an illusion? And how could you ever possibly know? When you begin asking philosophical, rational questions about pantheism, you discover that pantheism has no answers. And for the pantheist, that's a feature. It's not a bug, it's a feature. It's the way pantheism is designed. Secondly, if the world is really an illusion, why do pantheists look for traffic before crossing the street? Because if you've ever been in London, you know that the London traffic is notoriously awful, and you really have to look both directions before you cross the street, and it's coming from the direction you're not expecting it. If you live in a country where traffic goes on the right-hand side, like most of us, you go to London and it's coming from the other direction. They've actually got signs painted on the crosswalks saying, look to the right, because that's the direction the traffic is first going to try to hit you. Why do pantheists look for traffic before they cross the street? If you're a pantheist, how do you ever learn to fly an airplane? Because if the world is really an illusion, how can you possibly think that the lift equation means anything, or that those gauges that you're looking at on the instrument panel mean anything? And yet pantheists can fly airplanes, and pantheists walk around big cities every day because they are inconsistent. So that's second one. Thirdly, pantheism inadequately handles evil. If evil is an illusion, why does it seem so real? I mean, even the pantheists would probably agree with me that Adolf Hitler was wrong to murder so many people, and Mother Teresa was right to help so many people out of poverty. To say that Mother Teresa and Adolf Hitler are indifferent, they're all one and the same, is something that even the pantheist can't really do. Pantheists try to avoid evil, but if it's an illusion, why do it? Fourthly, if God is all in all, and then evil is an illusion, and there are no absolute rights and wrongs, there are some self-contradictory logical options, but this is what most pantheists seem to believe. They have to say that evil is simply an illusion. There are no absolutes. Fifthly, if God is infinite, yet shares its, or whatever, it's hard to know what kind of pronoun to use with a pantheistic God. If God is infinite, yet shares its being with the creation, which is the ex deo or ex theo creation, we must ask, how can the infinite be finite? How can the infinite God be the finite creation? How can the absolute be relative? How can the unchanging change? There are some logical inconsistencies here. Sixthly, if God is unknowable in an intellectual way, the claim itself seems meaningless. If the claim itself can't be understood intellectually, then what does it mean? What's he saying if it doesn't mean anything? If the claim cannot be understood intellectual, it's self-defeating. The claim is that nothing can be understood about God in an intellectual way. But the pantheist expects us to know intellectually that God cannot be known intellectually. And ultimately, that's nonsense. And seventh, the pantheist's denial that logic applies to reality is self-defeating. If logic doesn't apply to reality, then your logic is useless. When it applies to reality, you're claiming that your pantheism is not real. And ultimately, that's, again, it's absurd and it's self-defeating. I'm going to summarize pantheism a little bit. This is a photograph from Calcutta. which is a place that most of us would agree has not been served very well by the Hindu pantheism. Pantheism is a position that is held by very large numbers of people, both East and West. The largest numbers, of course, are in the East, India and China. Although in China, the pantheist notions of Buddhism are suppressed. You'll find this is the traditional view. The same is true in Japan. Those ancient traditional views are suppressed as much as possible, yet those are the cultural norms. A very large number of people, I'm not sure of the percentage, probably close to half of the world's population is pantheistic, at least by culture. Pantheism has broad cultural implications. Pantheism is inherently irrational and ultimately destructive. If you want to go and visit what we could rightly call a hellhole, go to Calcutta, or just about any place else where large numbers of pantheists live together. Because if nothing is real and nothing matters and nothing that I do can ever make a difference, and we actually believe that, this is the result. Pantheists are very difficult to argue with, but they can see the difference in the way Christians live. So when we're working with a pantheist target audience, our best bet is to live a coherent Christian life and love people the way we find them, and let them watch us live. Let them watch us do life, and answer their questions when they ask them, and offer help when it's appropriate. And then pray for God to do a miracle. Ultimately, pantheists are like atheists. It's very difficult to reach them. They cannot be argued into the kingdom. God has to do a miracle. And God does do miracles. He's in the business of that. The fun part is when we get to be in on that. So that's pantheism. Let me make that disappear. I'll stop that share, and I'm going to unmute everybody. Folks, thank you for showing up and being so faithful to this. I know it is difficult material. I recognize that. I have difficulties with pantheism myself. Now, next week, it gets worse. You thought this was bad. We're going to go on to another one that is, frankly, even more absurd. We call it panentheism. And I'm not going to try to define that quite yet. We'll look at it next week. But we're starting to run out of logical alternatives. And so the next couple of sessions, we're going to look at some logical possibilities that are really, honest and truly only held by crazy people and philosophers. And it's kind of fun. But I repeat myself. Most philosophers I know are also a little crazy. And I've taught philosophy, so I suppose that means I'm a little crazy. So we're going to come back at this. We're going to do some more. I'm going to be missing you all until next week. Paul, you take care of yourself. Tell Susie I said so. Get plenty to drink and eat right. You got to get over this. Yeah, we need you well. And Brother Oscar, thank you for your faithfulness there. I love that. And all my friends in Italy, I'm seeing all of you there. Oh my God, I got Christy and Alex and Eduardo and the whole crowd here. We've got a whole big group here. Guys, thanks for coming. This is fun. I always enjoy this. And we'll see you again next Wednesday. God bless everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Good night,
Thank you,
everyone.
Dr. John.
Good night.
Thank you,
God
Dr. John.
bless.
Thank you.
Ciao,
Bye-bye,
ciao.
brother.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye, Don.
Bye, Don.